Today, we are going to talk about fishing in English. All of the terms that you might need to know if you want to talk about fishing in English. And towards the end of the lesson, we will actually talk about how you need to follow some rules if you want to fish here in the United States. So, before we get too far, I think we are live on Facebook and I think we are live on YouTube. So, welcome to anyone who is watching on Facebook or YouTube. First term we are going to talk about is angler. Angler. Now, this is a very fancy term for someone who fishes. So, if you look at the bottom, the sentence is the angler put his line in the water to catch fish. Now, we're going to talk about what a line is in a minute. But angler is another name for a person who fishes. So you might also hear fisherman or fisherwoman or just like somebody who fishes. But angler is the technical term. So here's the warning. The next few terms might be confusing because they all work together to do the job. You may want to rewatch this part. And some of them have a couple different names. So if you look at that picture, shout out to anyone watching or listening on the podcast. You can't see that picture, and I'm sorry. But there is a long rod or a long pole in the picture, and that is what we call it. Rod, fishing rod, a fishing pole. So a fishing rod is a long stick with a line and hook that people use to catch fish in the water. So in that definition, I have a couple things I will be talking about in a minute, like hook and line. A rod is another name for a fishing pole. You will hear both terms. You might fish with a pole, you might fish with a rod. The next one, I can make this a little bigger, but this is a reel. It's a circle kind of thing. A fishing reel is a round thing that you turn to bring the fishing line in or let it out when you're trying to catch fish. And again, for that one, there are a couple terms we'll talk about in a minute. Line. I've mentioned it once before, and it is very hard to see because it is so thin. It's like a string, only it's a little stronger than a string. You won't hear that very often, a fishing string. I don't think you'll ever hear it, but you will hear fishing line. So let me make that a little bigger. See where that arrow is pointing to. The thing on that line is a hook, which we will talk about in just a minute. But line. A fishing line is a long, thin string that you put in the water when you're fishing. You can use it to catch fish. So you might hear the term, I'm going to drop a line in the water. Anybody who says that is going to be fishing. They are going to try to catch fish. All right, before we go any further, I'm wondering, please let me know in the chat, do you fish? Do you ever go fishing? Because to be honest, I don't fish very often. All of the research I did for this lesson came from the internet. Miguel, could you explain the phrasal verbs? Maybe we should get back to the lesson because I do have this. We wouldn't say reel off. We wouldn't say that. We would say reel in. And I just remembered I did not put the word cast. Maybe I should do a short lesson about cast because it has a number of different meanings. But when we talk about cast for fishing, you can cast out your line. And that means to throw the hook or the bait, which we still need to talk about. You throw that really far into the water. You cast out your line. Hook. A fishing hook is a small, sharp tool used for catching fish. It has a pointy end to catch the fish when they bite the bait. We still need to talk about bait, which is why maybe you want to rewatch this lesson. Here's a sentence with hook. He put a fishing hook on his line to catch some fish in the river. I need to do a whole lesson on types of water. River is one of them. Freshwater. We will talk about freshwater in a minute. Okay. This next one is tough. This is one reason English is so hard. I am going to talk about the word sink. We have a couple different ways to use sink. This one you probably know, right? Sink, like the one in the picture. It's a noun. It's a thing. A sink is a big, usually square or rectangular bowl in your kitchen or bathroom where you wash dishes or your hands. Make it a little bigger so you can see me. No, so you can see the sink. So you don't have to look at my face. That's a sink. I think most people know that. But we also have a verb in English called sink. So let's talk about that. Now, I tried to make this as clear as possible. Sink. In the picture, I have a rock in water, and that rock is going down to the bottom of the water. And in English, we call that sink. The opposite is float. So to sink means to go down or fall to the bottom of water, like when things get heavy and go under the surface. It is the opposite of float. So that's important because the next fishing term I'm going to talk about is called a sinker. And a sinker is probably going to be made of metal, and it is going to make your hook go down below the water. So a sinker is a small, heavy weight that is attached to the fishing line to make the bait or lure sink down in the water. I'll say it again. Maybe you should watch this again because we need to talk about bait and lure. All of these are connected. But we talked about hook. We talked about line. And we talked about sinker. So the next thing I would like to teach you, there's another picture of a sinker. The next thing I would like to teach you is the saying we have in English is like, they fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. You might hear that. Yes, they're all fishing terms, but this phrase doesn't have anything to do with fishing. So we might call it an idiom. This is what it means. The phrase hook, line, and sinker is used when someone believes something totally. There is no doubt. It's like saying they were completely fooled or tricked. So in that picture, I have a picture of a man, a woman. She looks like she is holding a bouquet of flowers. That might be a French term that English stole. A bouquet of flowers. And it looks like she wants to hit him with those flowers for some reason. So maybe, how about this? Maybe her boyfriend is not a nice person, but she fell for him hook, line, and sinker. You'll often hear that verb. They fell for it. Hook, line, and sinker. So maybe he was cheating on her the whole time. Maybe he wasn't being honest with her. She fell in love with him, and then she found out he was a jerk. But at one time, she fell for him. Hook, line, and sinker. All right, the next one that I want to talk about to help you understand hook, line, and sinker is this term, a magician. And if you look at the picture, I'm sure you have magicians in your language. They practice something we like to call magic in English. So they fool people. They do tricks, maybe pulling a rabbit out of a hat. I don't even know if you can do that anymore. It's kind of mean for the rabbit. Or maybe saw a lady in half. Again, kind of cruel. Magicians seem like they're kind of mean, pulling rabbits and cutting ladies. But a lot of children will fall for their tricks, hook, line, and sinker. They totally believe that the magician is doing something real. And of course, he's not really sawing the woman in half. But little kids are often fooled by magicians' tricks. Sometimes they fall for them, hook, line, and sinker. Here's an example sentence. She believed the magician's trick was real. Hook, line, and sinker. She had no doubts. So, probably some little girl crying after she sees a nice woman cut right in half. All right, back to fishing. So these are all fishing terms for the next couple ones. Lure. Lure. We also have that verb in English. It might not have anything to do with fishing, but lure means to attract or try to bring somebody closer to you or bring something closer to you. But in fishing, they look like that. Lures. You try to attract fish. You try to catch fish with lures. A fishing lure is like a colorful toy that you put on a fishing line to trick fish into biting. So they see the shiny object, they go closer to it, they try to bite it, and guess what? There is now a hook in their mouth, and they become your dinner. Maybe. The colorful fishing lure was so shiny that it attracted the fish's attention. Fish's attention. One fish, two fish. But right there, the fish has possession of its attention. So that is a correct sentence. Fishes. Apostrophe S. All right, the next one. This is the main reason why I don't fish, is because you have to bait the hook. And oftentimes you use what we call live bait. And that live bait is often a worm. Just in case you didn't know what a worm was in English, there's a picture of a worm. I might describe that worm as slimy, slippery. When you pick up the worm, it might slip from your fingers. Yeah. The one main reason I don't fish. And also, I don't like to eat fish. I don't like the taste most of the time. But from the chat, it looks like quite a few people do fish in here. Here's a sentence for you. With bait and worm. He put a tasty worm on the hook as bait to catch the fish. So just like lure, you try to bring the fish to your hook. You can do it with a lure, usually something shiny, so the fish will look at it, or something tasty, like a worm. So the fish bite your worm, and then you bite the fish, probably after you cook it, unless you have it with sushi. Here is a verb we use, which is catch. You catch a fish, but I also have a phrasal verb for you, and it's been mentioned in the chat. That's reel in. You can catch a fish, which means you might get it on your hook, bring it home, and it's your dinner. But you can also catch a ball. It's like to receive it. You can also catch a cold. Where I live, starting to get a little colder, and people often get sick with maybe colds or flus. I have a whole English lesson on how to talk about colds. Did it a couple years ago. But you can catch a cold, which means you start to get sick. You might have a runny nose, maybe a sore throat. So catch is a weird verb. But almost always, when you hear this phrasal verb, reel in, you're talking about fishing in English. Reel in is another way to say catch in English. She reeled in a big fish. You remember reel from before? It's that little circular thing we talked about. Catch and release. Yes. Maybe I missed something in the chat. But if you are fishing, but you just like to fish and you don't want to eat any of the fish, you're just going to put them back in the water, or you're just going to throw the fish back in the water, we call it catch and release. Catch and release. And mode, I have not talked about that. It's not part of the lesson. Tackle box. These are a little easier because they're not connected to the fishing pole. But a tackle box, if you can see that picture, it probably explains everything. A tackle box is a container used to store or keep and organize fishing equipment, such as hooks, lures, and fishing line. So we've talked about all three of those things already: hooks, lures, and fishing line. I'm sure if you are a fisherman or a fisherwoman or an angler, you have a tackle box. It just helps keep all of the things you need organized. Not too bad. Now, this isn't too bad either, I don't think, because we are going to talk about freshwater and saltwater kind of at the same time. So you can go fishing in fresh water. Fresh water is simply water without salt. It's like lakes, ponds, rivers and streams. And I plan to do another English lesson on types of water. I did one when I first started the channel, talking about all those types of water, but I'm going to update that lesson. Freshwater. Now, most of the water on our planet is seawater. So that would be pretty much water in the ocean or the sea. So freshwater and saltwater, two different types of water. You can drink fresh water most of the time, right? Most of the time. You won't get sick most of the time. Salt water, you can drink it, but it's probably just going to make you more thirsty. So you might not want to drink too much of it. It could make you sick. Let's talk about a couple different types of fish. Trout. In English, we call that type of fish a trout. And trout is one, excuse me, typo. Let me fix that. One type. Here we go. Trout is one type of fish that is mostly freshwater. Trout is a freshwater fish. And I say mostly because sometimes it happens where you will find trout in the sea or the ocean, but that's not where they like to live. They are a freshwater fish. Now, this one is comfortable in both freshwater and saltwater. And this is what a salmon might look like on the plate. And it's a very unique looking fish. A lot of times, fish will be white when it's on the plate. I will have a picture of that in just a minute. But salmon is more red or more pink. And salmon can be a freshwater fish or it can be a saltwater fish. We got the rare silent L in that word. It is pronounced salmon. Salmon. Am I getting a lot of text messages? No. Thought my phone. I don't have very many friends. So when I get a text message, when my phone vibrates, it's usually something important. But no. Nobody was texting me. Like usual. I hear something though. Anyways, salmon. If you go to the southern part of the United States, you actually might hear this fish called salmon. So there are two ways to pronounce this fish in the United States, but the most common way is salmon. One thing you might need to go fishing is a license. So in the United States, if you want to drive a car, you need a driver's license. I have done an English lesson on driving. So you need a license to drive a car. You also need a license to fish. What makes a driver's license different from a fishing license is that when you get your driver's license, you can drive in every state. I have a driver's license from the state of Maine, but if I wanted to, I could drive in the state of New York, or I could drive in the state of California. Not so with fishing. Each state requires its own fishing license. There is another typo. Oh boy. Let me fix that. If I'm an English teacher, I should not have typos. Got rid of the typo. Each state requires its own fishing license. And that means if I have a California fishing license, I can't fish in New York until I get a New York fishing license. Yep, each state requires its own license. And each year, you have to get a new license. I think they cost like $15 to $20 to get a fishing license. Game warden is the next one. And so when you buy your fishing license, what that does is it helps save the fish. Because in the United States, we have something called game wardens, and they are like the police for the woods and the water. So if you are a hunter, you also have other rules to follow. If you're an angler or a fisherman or a fisherwoman, you have rules you have to follow. So, game wardens are like the police for the woods and water. They make sure people follow the rules when fishing and hunting. Because if you don't follow the rules, and that leads to overfishing, which we will talk about in a minute. Game wardens try to prevent overfishing. In some states, there is a limit to the amount of fish you can catch in one day. And the reason that law is there is so that all the fish don't disappear. And if all the fish disappear, we might call that overfishing. If a lake or river is overfished, it might not have any more fish in it. So we try to conserve the fish. It means not to waste it, to save it. Fish are conserved in my state. Let's talk about what happens when you catch a fish. We're going to talk about something called scales when it comes to fishing. So if you know what skin is, like all of this is my skin. I think I've done an English lesson on body parts before, but a fish's skin has something called scales, and they are not that good to eat. A fish has scales on its skin. You need to remove the scales before you eat the fish. And to do that, you must do something called descaling the fish. We call it descaling when you remove the scales of a fish. So in that picture, that fish is going to be a meal very soon. But before it is cooked, you definitely want to get rid of those scales. If not, you will have them in your mouth while you're eating, and that's not very fun for anybody. The last thing I would like to teach you, I think this comes from the French, and that is fillet. So if you look at that type of fish, it is a fillet of fish. Just one way in English, we say piece of fish. So a fillet is usually very thin. And it looks like there are 2 fillets on that plate. And maybe a slice of lemon. And maybe a sprig of parsley.